بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. A great jurist, a great faqih of his time, Imam Malik rahimahullah, has once said, من تصوف ولم يتفقه فقد تزندق. That whoever practices tasawwuf or tazkiyah or a person who is in the path of suluk, ولم يتفقه, but he does not acquire knowledge of the Sharia, فقد تزندق, such a person has corrupted his faith, such a person has corrupted his iman. Then Imam Malik rahimahullah goes on to say, وَمَنْ تَفَقَّهَ وَلَمْ يَتَسَوَّفْ. That a person who acquired the Sharia, who acquired knowledge of the Sharia, of the Quran, of the Hadith, وَلَمْ يَتَسَوَّفْ, but he did not acquire spirituality, he did not acquire the rectification of his heart, he was not on the path of suluk, فَقَدْ تَفَسَّقَ, such a person is a transgressor, such a person is a fasiq. And then Imam Malik rahimahullah goes on to say, وَمَنْ جَمَعَ بَيْنَ الْإِثْنَيْنِ فَقَدْ تَحَقَّقَ, which means that if someone was to combine the both, he was to learn and acquire knowledge of the Sharia, and also on top of that, he acquired spiritual rectification and Islah, then فَقَدْ تَحَقَّقَ, such a person in fact has acquired the true path and the correct path. Now let's analyze this particular statement of Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh. First and foremost, who was Imam Malik rahimahullah? Now Imam Malik, he's not like one of your run-of-the-mill scholars, he's not one of those local imams and so on and so forth. But Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh, he was a great faqih and jurist of his time. Hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people worldwide follow his interpretation of the Quran and on the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Imam Malik rahmatullah, on top of that, he was a resident of Medina Munawwara, and he wrote a very famous hadith book entitled the Muwatta of Imam Malik rahmatullah, which Imam Shafi rahmatullah has said that this book of Imam Malik is the most sound or the most sound and the most reliable book after the book of Allah, i.e. after the Holy Quran. It is the most reliable and the most sound. Now this was the status of Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh. But he even knew and understood the importance of tasawwuf and tazkiyah. He was a great scholar of his time. Many people followed his interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. He had written so many books. Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayh would say about this particular book, the most authentic, the most reliable after the Holy Quran. But even then, Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh understood the importance of suluk, understood the importance of tazkiyah, and he said that, and again, it's not like there's no conflict of interest here. It's not like you could say someone who's already a sheikh and he's saying, oh well, you need to be in the path of suluk and so on. There's no conflict of interest, but instead he said that, look, you guys, you need to combine both. You need to be on the path of suluk, and also you need to be on the path of learning and acquiring deen and knowledge, and by keeping steadfast on these two things, فَقَدْ تَحَقَّقَ, you indeed have acquired the true path and the right path and the correct path. Now let's analyze the two statements which Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi said. Starting off with the second one firstly, where he said, وَمَنْ تَفَقَّهَا وَلَمْ يَتَصَوَّفْ. That person who acquires knowledge but not tazkiyah, not suluk, not tasawwuf, then such a person is a transgressor, such a person is a fasik. Now this is very important in particular for imams, for shuyukh, for ulamas, that after acquiring knowledge, after acquiring the interpretation of the Holy Quran, after learning about the interpretation of the Hadith, ilm and knowledge doesn't stop there. But instead, if the ulamas and if the imams and the shuyukh, if they want their knowledge and their preaching to continue, if they want their preaching and their da'wah to have an effect on people's hearts, then it is imperative for them to be on the path of suluk, to be on the path of tazkiyah, because alim who also at the same time is spiritually rectified, his speech, his words, his kalam is going to have an effect on the heart of his audience than an alim or an imam but who is not practicing. Practicing meaning like who is, spiritually, he's still got his hatred and jealousy and takabbur and pride and arrogance for others in his heart. Now if that same person was to deliver a speech or a sermon, if he was to give advice to someone, it's not going to have the same effect than an imam or a sheikh or a person who has got the knowledge and also at the same time is spiritually rectified himself, because he then got two things coming at that person who's in the audience. Number one is the outside knowledge, and then on top of that, the internal knowledge in terms of the spirituality, in terms of the ikhlas, in terms of the sincerity. It has a more effect on the audience. So for the imams and alims and shuyukh, ulamas in particular, tasawwuf is something which is very, very important, and this is what Imam Malik rahmatullahi has said, that alim or an imam who's just acquired the knowledge but not the tazkiyah, faqad tafassaqa, which means that his actions, this by the way, means like actions which are tainted or corrupt. And this is what sometimes happens, that a person has got the knowledge, he's got the ilm, but he's like, for example, delivering, say, a talk or a lecture, but because his interior motives are different, his motive may be, I just want to give a lecture so that people could know about me. Because his motives and his intentions are different, it is basically for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what happens is that he's not able to kind of create any venom, any kind of effect in his speech. So therefore what happens is delivering the speech to the audience, to the people, but the audience, the people are not taking any benefit from what he is saying. So imams, for alims, for ulamas, for shuyukh, tazkiyah, tasawwuf is something very important. Otherwise what would happen is faqad tafassaqa, their actions will always be tainted. The iman may be okay because they have the knowledge for the iman and the faith, but their actions will always be tainted and corrupt. Which then takes me on to the first part of Imam Malik rahmatullah's statement, who said, فَمَنْ تَسَوَّفَ وَلَمْ يَتَفَقَّهْ, that whoever has acquired tasawwuf and tazkiyah, but he hasn't acquired knowledge of the Sharia, فَقَدْ تَزَنْدَقَ, such a person is a zindiq. Now zindiq is someone whose iman is corrupt. Fisk or fasik is someone whose actions are corrupt, and zindiq or tazandaqa is someone whose iman or whose faith is corrupt. And we call this kind of like a nifaq wala kufr. Basically he's living a life of like basically deception and hypocrisy. Now what I'm trying to say is that many people, they get kashf, they get ilham. Even non-Muslims can get kashf and ilham. Bad people, sinners can get kashf and ilham. But the main idea of tazkiyah tasawwuf is not kashf and ilham. If you get it, then that's good. But the main aim for tazkiyah and tasawwuf is to build the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if somebody is just saying, well, I'm getting kush, I'm getting ilham, and there's no need for me to practice on the Sharia and practice on the religion, then as you can see from Imam Malik's statement, فَقَدْ تَزَنْدَقَ, he is actually to a certain extent like a hypocrite, like a munafiq, in terms of he is using that, or that is going to deceive him, and instead of keeping him on the straight path, it's actually going to take him away from the straight path. It's going to deviate him if he has that particular thought and assumption. Which actually then takes me on to the theme of today's talk. It's something what we call Shariah and Tariqah. Shariah and Tariqah. Now what does that mean? Now Shariah and Tariqah basically means that you need to follow the Sharia and you need to follow a Tariqah. Both of them are inseparable, meaning like you have to act upon both of them. You can't survive without Tariqah, but also at the same time, if you stick to Tariqah but not the Sharia, you're also not going to survive as well. You need both of them to go hand in hand, the Sharia and the Tariqah. And if you want a simile or a comparison, I'll give you a simile. Just say, for example, the Sharia is like the master and the Tariqah is like the slave. In terms of the same way the slave is subservient to his master, similarly Tariqah is subservient to the Sharia. What I'm trying to say is that our main goal is to follow the Sharia, is to follow the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to abide by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, to abide and try to implement the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our life. That is the main aim, that is the main goal. And Tariqah, being in the path of suluk, rectifying our inner self, all these things are zarai, all these things are means, are asbab for us to reach that particular destination. So there's two things, but remember you can't achieve the Sharia properly without the Tariqah. Because as I was explaining, what could then happen is that you may then start doing certain actions thinking that, oh, I'm doing it for this particular reason, but the true reality is that you're doing it for another reason which conflicts with the rules of the Sharia and rules of Islam, in terms of you may be thinking in your head that, okay, I'm doing this and I'm taking the good meaning here, whereas in reality you're doing it for your name, for riyah, for show-offing and so on, so that will make it corrupt. So you need both of them to go hand in hand. You need the Sharia, but also at the same time to achieve and to get the full fruit from the Sharia, you also need the Tariqah and you also need the suluk and the path of Tazkiyah as well. And this also takes me on to, like, it's like a common question which people ask, is like, they say, or sometimes we see these Sufis, they're just in their zikr, but we don't see them pray salah. Or they just like do their zikr, but they don't follow the sunnah and so on. As I mentioned before, that obviously you get imposters in every field. Remember, no tariqah has ever permitted that you are not allowed to pray salah, or you don't have to pray salah. Remember, every tariqah which is around, which obviously abides by the principles of the Sharia, they obviously have to pray salah, they have to give zakat, they have to fast, they have to go hajj once in a lifetime, and then they use the tariqah, they use the suluk, they use the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to actually achieve the tranquility and the true sincerity in their worship and in their ibadah. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that the two things are, they come together, they're inseparable. You can't survive with just Sharia, but also at the same time you can't just survive with Tariqah and you leave out the Sharia, you leave out Salah, you leave out Zakat, you leave out fasting, and think that, okay, if I just see, Ilham, and if I see Kashf, and if I see angels, that's going to be okay for my savior in the fire from the fire of hell, then you're totally incorrect. You need both of them to survive in the hereafter. You need the Sharia, you need the rules, you need to be doing good deeds, you need to be doing good action, and also at the same time, you need to be having the rectification of the heart. Now, as I was saying, that these two things are very, very important. And let's have a now look at the word tariqah. Now remember, the word tariqah, it comes from the root word tariq, which means the path. I.e. a path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we say Sharia, Sharia basically means the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now the same way you have four schools of thought, four mazahib, there are also many kind of tariqahs which are around, but there are four which are the main ones which actually have their basis or their roots all the way up to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now the four tariqahs which are common are, number one, the Qadiriyah tariqah, and the sheikh of that particular tariqah is Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah. So it's basically the name of that tariqah or that path is given after the founder sheikh. Similarly, when you look at the Chishti tariqah, it's after Hazrat Moinuddin Chishti rahmatullah. So after him, you've got his tariqah and you've got his followers. Similarly, the Suharwardi tariqah is after Sheikh Sihabuddin Suharwardi. So these followers follow the Suharwardi tariqah. Now, with regards to the Naqshbandiya tariqah, the actual founder, his name was Bahauddin Naqshband. And from there you got like two kind of ambits or two kind of groups. One is the Mujaddidiyya, and then you've got the Uwaisiyya. Now the zikr which they both use is similar in terms of zikr qalbi, zikr from the heart. But the Uwaisiyya tariqah, the one which we follow, the prophetic blessings are derived similar to the prophetic blessings derived by Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayh from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam without physically meeting Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now who was Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayh? Now it's mentioned in a hadith of Sahih Muslim that narrated by Umar bin Khattab anhu, that he once heard Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say, Inna khayra tabi'in rajulun yuqalu lahu Uwais. That the best of all the predecessors, so tabi'in are those who have seen the companion but not Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself. So it's mentioned that the best tabi'i, the best predecessor is Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi. Now why did he receive such a status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in the eyes of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Now Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi, he lived in Yemen. And he wanted to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And what I mean by like meeting, he really wanted to meet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But the thing was that he had a mother who was very ill, and his mother did not allow Uwais Qarni to go and see Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now and from this we can understand the importance of obeying your parents. Look, Uwais Qarni, he had Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As we know, Yemen is just on top of Saudi Arabia, so he wasn't that far, so he could have gone to see Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and then come back and be with his mother. But because his mother was ill, he didn't want to leave his mother, so therefore what he did, he gave up the blessing of seeing Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam with his own two eyes. Why? For the sake of his mother, so that he can look after and do her khidmah, help her out when she was ill. So this was what Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi did, looking after his mother, being obedient to his mother. But obviously when he was in Yemen, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam knew about him, that he wants to come and see me, but because of his ill mother, he's unable to come and see me. And he also goes on to say that Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi, he had so much love for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in terms of the difficulties and the hardships he went through, that Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi, when he heard during the battle of Uhud that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost his two front teeth, Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi, he then broke his teeth. And then, without knowing which one exactly did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam break, he then broke every single one of his teeth. This was the love he had for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lost two teeth for the sake of the religion. Hazrat Uwais Qarni, he then took out all of his teeth. And there's so many examples of Uwais Qarni, his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which obviously takes us on to the Sharia part. The Sharia means that you obey Allah's command and you obey the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We following the Tariqah of Naqshbandiyya Uwaisiyya, we need to model ourselves according to the model of Hazrat Uwais Qarni rahmatullah alayhi, who had so much love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was hurt, he would take the pain upon himself. He would try to live and emulate like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every single part of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam life he will try to implement in his own life. Which then takes us on to the question that we, being in this particular path from suluk, we need to also model our life according to the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ittibai sunnah, following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when we talk about ittibai sunnah doesn't mean just like having a beard and think, oh, that's it, I've done the sunnah, that's enough. No, there's so many sunnahs of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And again, you need to look at the stories of the Sahabas and the companions to see how they, word for word, action for action, acted upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Take example of Sayyidina Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the son of Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu. So it's mentioned a hadith, a very famous hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Abu Dawud, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wake up for tahajjud, then he would pray his tahajjud, then lastly he will then pray the witr salah, and then the hadith goes on to say that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will then sleep meaning that when he prayed his salah, he will just lie down for a couple of minutes. He will wait for Hazrat Bilal to give the azan, and then afterwards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would then get up. He will then pray the 2 rakat fajr sunnah, and then he will pray the 2 rakat fajr, and then he will wait until Ishraq, as all of you know. Now, all the scholars have said, the majority of scholars have said, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lying down for a couple of minutes after finishing his tahajjud, and the time from finishing his tahajjud all the way up to the 2 rakat fajr sunnah, that lying down of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did it out of chance or ittifaqan, meaning like he just felt a bit tired that day, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lied down for a couple of minutes, and then when the fajr azan was given, he then quickly got up, and then he read his 2 rakat fajr sunnah. But Sayyidina Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, what he would do, because he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing that, just once, he didn't care whether Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it by chance or whether it's a sunnah or so on and so forth, because he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing it. From that day all the way till his death, every day when he would wake up for tahajjud, after praying tahajjud, he would lie down for a couple of minutes, and then he will get up and then pray his 2 rakat fajr sunnah. That is ittibai sunnah. Many examples. In particular, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you do your tawaf, you kiss the black stone. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, when obviously most of the Sahabas were slowly passing away during the Tabi'ins and predecessors' time, many people started going Hajj regularly. There were many Muslims. So what slowly happened was that there used to always be a bead. There would always be a kind of a crowd near the black stone. Now Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, what he would do, he would actually get into the middle of the crowd. He would actually push people around, trying to kiss the black stone. Now people asked him that, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, look, you're a companion, a great companion, the son of Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, what's all this? I'm seeing like you're pushing people to go and kiss the black stone. So then Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu replied by saying that because I saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kiss the black stone, that's why I am kissing the black stone. So again, he didn't, this thing about taklif and so on, giving pain, obviously that's also true as well, we should not forget that. But look at Ibn Umar anhu, because he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it, he was willing to get into the middle of the crowd, push people around so that he can go and kiss the black stone. And many, many examples of the Sahabas in their staunchness, the way they acted upon the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now following the tariqah of Naqshbandiyya Uwaysiyya, which takes the barakah like Hazrat Uwais Qadi rahmatullah took the barakah and blessing from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all the Sahabas, even Hazrat Uwais Qadi rahmatullah alayhi, all the predecessors, they all staunchly followed the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is what it is, tariqah and sharia, like following the path of suluk, and also following the Sharia, following the Quran, and following the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, following his practices, following his words, trying to implement every single word and action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our life. Now, just a couple of things here. I'll mention a particular objection which people may have. I've mentioned 4 schools or 4 silsilas, shall I say. And when you trace the silsilas in terms of the founders like Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayhi and so on and so forth, you'll find that they weren't even born in Arabia. Like if you take Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani rahmatullah alayhi, he was born somewhere near Iran. If Maulana Muinuddin Chishti rahmatullah was born somewhere in Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. We've looked at Bahauddin Naqshband. He was actually born in Bukhara, which is like modern day Uzbekistan. So people may then look at it and think that, okay, these silsilas, they didn't originate from Arabia, they didn't originate from Makkah or Medina, they didn't originate from, say, Baytul Maqdis or near the Masjid al-Aqsa. It originated in Central Asia, it originated around the Indian subcontinent. So automatically people will think, oh, this is a bid'ah, this is an innovation. Now let me tell you one thing. Even those people who say that, and then on top of that, then they start following Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi Sahih and Imam Muslim and so on. If we look at the biography, Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi is not actually from Arabia. He's not actually from Makkah or Medina. Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi was actually from Uzbekistan, and he wrote the hadith book. Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullah alayhi, he's also from Uzbekistan as well. When you look at all the 6 books of hadith, like your Imam Abu Dawud and so on, they weren't even there, they weren't even in Arabia, they're not in Makkah or Medina, they weren't born in Medina, Makkah. They were born in some other places in Uzbekistan, in Kazakhstan and so on, then they wrote the hadith book. What I'm trying to say is that not everything, everything in Islam is not found in Makkah and Medina. So many great shuyukh and great scholars, they were born somewhere else, they did their service or deed somewhere else. Just because it's not in Makkah or Medina or in Bayt al-Maqdis doesn't mean, it's a bid'ah, it's an innovation. Because if you're going to call these silsilas innovation, then you're going to call the Sahih of Imam Bukhari rahmatullah innovation, you're going to call the Sahih of Imam Muslim rahmatullah innovation. So what I'm trying to say is that just because they're not in Makkah or Medina doesn't mean that it's a bid'ah, doesn't mean it's an innovation, but in fact, many people who are non-Arab, they have done a lot of effort and a lot of work for the deen in different areas and in different ways. And this is also mentioned in a hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where once the companions, they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam about non-Arabs. Zukirat al-a'ajimu inda Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, La ana bihim aw bi ba'dihim awsaqu minni bikum aw bi ba'dikum. Which means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that my connection or relation with these non-Arabs is more stronger than some of you. Rasulullah saying this to the companions, that my connection and my link with the non-Arabs is more stronger than some of you, some of the companions. Imagine that. Look, the companions, we talked about the companions, how close they were to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked regarding non-Arabs and so on, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that my connection with them is more stronger than some of you. Trying to imply that deen and religion not just based in Medina, Munawwara or in Makkah, but obviously the deen, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's prophethood was for the entire universe, for entire mankind. So obviously other people, they did also work for deen, khidmat for deen, even though they didn't actually live in Makkah or Medina. Now this takes me back onto the point with regards to tariqah and why do we have these four great shuyukhs and so on, each being the founder of their silsila and their chain of transmission all the way back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now there is a very famous Arabic saying where it goes with the word لِكُلِّ فَنٍ رِجَالٍ, which means that for every art there are men. Now what is this particular saying is trying to say is that for every field, for every subject, you've got like an expert in that particular field. So just say for example, if there's like the field of medicine, you'll go to a doctor. The field with regards to the law of the country, you go to a lawyer, you go to a solicitor. If it's say for example a scholar or a shuyukh when it comes to the field of knowledge, so for every field you have experts in that particular field. Now the exact same when it comes to tazkiyah and when it comes to tasawwuf, that you can't go to a doctor for your spiritual illnesses, for your spiritual maladies. You won't go to a lawyer for your spiritual maladies and so on. So here, exactly the same, we also have great shuyukhs and great imams who were actually, experts in the field when it came to tasawwuf and when it came to tazkiyah. And remember, this system of tasawwuf and tazkiyah, and in need of a guide, in need of a sheikh, started from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whatever he was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it came through Sayyiduna Jibreel alayhi salam. Few exceptions in terms of salah where he got the order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly, but generally speaking, the Quran, the words of the Quran, the words which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to say, it came from Sayyiduna Jibreel alayhi salam. It was passed on to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then became the sheikh, then became the teacher for the companions then became the sheikh and the teacher for the tabi'in, for the predecessors, and thereafterwards to their predecessors, i.e. the tabi'in. And then afterwards, he then passed on to the imams and to the shuyukh. So what I'm trying to say is that this particular link or being in need of a guide and a teacher and so on, is started from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. Now, this is where the main question comes in terms of what kind of guide or what kind of sheikh should we look for when it comes to tazkiyah, when it comes to spiritual purification and rectification. Now remember, there are many conditions which the sheikh must have, but two which I've already kind of mentioned before is that the sheikh himself, the founder of that particular silsila himself has to abide by the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because remember, this silsila, as I mentioned, is like a means for us to gain nearness to Allah and to His beloved Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, if the sheikh or the guide himself is lacking or is kind of lax when it comes to Quranic teachings, when it comes to prophetic teachings and practices, then it's going to be difficult for us to reach that particular status. It says, for example, like the ladder which takes us to the top building, if it's kind of loose or something like that, if the pins are not in the right places, if it's loose, then we're going to slip and we are going to fall as well. So exactly here, you have to make sure that the sheikh or the guide which you get, he himself has to be practicing on the Quran, he himself has to be practicing on the Sunnah and the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you could draw a kind of comparison with another hadith, a hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the companion that if you, i.e. the companion, miss out 1/10 of all the rulings, you will be destroyed. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then went on to say, however, a time will come where if people were to act upon 1/10 of the rulings, they will be saved. Now the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that is because remember the companions, the Sahabas, they were going to pass on the deen and religion to the next generation. Now if the Sahabas and companions were lacking, were a bit lax, were a bit lazy when it came to certain actions and when it came to obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then the people afterwards, they're also going to be lax and they're also going to be lazy as well. So exactly here as well that if the main people, if the guides or if the imams or if the shuyukh, if they are kind of lax when it comes to the Quranic teachings, when it comes to the Sunnah, then what hope do you have on the followers of trying to then use that particular silsila and that particular guide to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So basically, just to wrap this particular theme and talk up, as I was saying that there's two things here, Shariah and Tariqah, and basically in Tasawwuf and Tazkiyah, both are required. If we just stick to the Tazkiyah and Tasawwuf side, you're not going to be going anywhere, and similarly, if you are just going to stick to the Shariah and not on the Tazkiyah and Tasawwuf, you're also not going to go anywhere as well. So what I'm trying to say is that both are needed, both are inseparable. You need both of them to reach your goal, which is to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to build about the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in your heart. And remember, this is what Tazkiyah Tasawwuf teaches, ishq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and muhabbat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love and affection for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that your love and affection for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes such that you are ready to sacrifice everything, ready to sacrifice your life, ready to sacrifice your wealth, your family for the sole purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what we call in Tasawwuf terms, fana fillah. Fana fillah means that you are such a state, like your heart has reached such a state that you are willing to give up everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are ready to sacrifice your life for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're doing everything, sadaqah, charity, ibadat, for the sole purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, you need to look at the examples and the stories of the Sahaba and the companions to find out how they sacrificed their life for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I mentioned earlier, the story of Sayyidina Bilal anhu. Sayyidina Bilal anhu, he didn't actually know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was from Abyssinia, he was from Ethiopia. He didn't actually know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on a one-to-one basis. But when he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's face, he knew that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the true prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he accepted Iman, he accepted the Kalima. Now when Hazrat Bilal accepted the Kalima, he was the slave of Umayyah bin Khalf, who was the idol worshipper. Umayyah bin Khalf will persecute Bilal anhu, he would torture Hazrat Bilal anhu, he would brutally torture Hazrat Bilal anhu. But even in those trying and testing situations and difficulties, Hazrat Bilal anhu did not give up the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he kept on saying, Ahad, Ahad, Allah is one, Allah is one. So this is what is fana fillah, sacrificing your life for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you go through any difficulties, we don't give up our religion. We don't give up what we stand for. But instead we should actually stick firm, and we should actually continue, being in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, preaching the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As I mentioned before, trying to practice what we've learned, what we've acquired in our life, and also, more importantly actually, is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These things, I've probably repeated these two words quite a lot, obedience and sunnah, but that's all I want to explain, that these two things are very, very important. Yeah, like you've got the tariqah, you've got the path of suluk, but also at the same time you need to be really steadfast and firm when it comes to the obedience of Allah and the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sometimes for other things, when it comes to worldly things, we give so much time. We watch TV, we watch all these programs and so on. But then when it comes to say extra 2 rakat nafal or the extra 2 rakat sunnah, we find that so difficult. Now obviously, you know this tasbih, tasawwuf, this is what it's teaching you. It's teaching you that you need to be firm on your iman and strong on the iman so that your iman reaches such a level that you will abide by Allah's command and follow the ways of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on what we said. Wa akhiru da'wani alhamdulillah.